Good evening. This is Don Sinkfield. Welcome to the Help to Adjust podcast. Good evening and welcome to the Help to Adjust podcast, where we talk about issues of education, psychology, inclusion, and equity. So usually we're on psychology, but education is a topic that is very close to my heart because for many years I was an educator. Tonight we have a guest, and this guest has been a career educator, holds a Juris Doctorate degree, holds 2 master's degrees, one in secondary education, another in educational leadership, has been a classroom teacher for a decade.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And then a
Now
administrator
right.
for 8 years
Yep.
subsequent to that.
Yep.
So everyone, I would like you to meet Mr. Vronski Mesidor.
Hello, everybody. I want to thank you, Don, and the entire Help to Adjust family. This is a great opportunity. I feel honored and humbled that, after so many years of friendship, that you would feel like what I would have to offer might be something that you would like to incorporate as part of the work that you do in servicing, the community. And this topic, to your point, when you talk about education, I mean, that's just something that is a major passion for me. And ultimately, that's the reason, I went through a career change. Even growing up, I'm a first generation Haitian American. Parents are from Haiti. And one of the things since day one, it was always about school, education. And seeing how education was able to allow, my parents, my sisters, and myself the opportunities that we've gotten in this country, in spite of all the realities that comes with being, a person of color or immigrant. That's the one key that I say has really allowed us to be successful.
We are definitely going to get on that topic more. You have worked in such a variety of settings, socioeconomically, in education.
Yes.
What do you see as the major differences between working, say, in East New York to the suburban school district that you now provide
Currently,
leadership in?
I mean, that's a loaded question because there's so many angles. And one of the biggest, and again, it's not it's just one thing, it's a couple of things. But the thing that, as you were asking the question, that stood out to me was expectation. I think that inherently in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods, the expectations of those who either go to the schools or those who live in the communities, there's a survival component to it. We're trying to survive. We're trying to get through to the next day, or we're trying to survive and be, just survival. Whereas what I've noticed in more quote unquote affluent, or expectations are not about survival. It's about continuation of legacy. It's about, you come from a particular type of background, you're going to continue that. Because of those expectations, it comes with it a lot of resources that are already in place to support that. And again, like I said, we could go into the historical components of that, which are definitely relevant to the realities
Absolutely.
of these spaces. But one thing I have to say, though, is that regardless of the space, though, or the location in the area, children are children, man. And whether you meet a young adult who comes from more well-to-do background, a child, who comes from a well-to-do background, or another child that comes from a low socioeconomic background, they live and go through the same things thematically in their lives: fear, anger, depression, anxiety. They have all those things in common.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know if it's just the fact that, again, in certain communities, they have more resources available to them, because again of this idea of where you're expected to do this, that, and a third. So we're going to surround you with these supports. But I've always looked at it through the lens of, well, if there's this uniform equality, then at the end of the day, everybody's capabilities to succeed exist.
Absolutely.
And if you're able to address all of those qualities, it doesn't matter where you're from. It's really about giving the person the opportunity to do better, to get to work, to get where they need to go. I always tell my teachers, they need to be whole, right? So like, and by whole I mean mind, spirit, mental.
Yeah.
If you're not whole, you're not going to be able to really produce. And it's the same thing that I've noticed in education. When a child is not whole, they're not going to be able to produce. So again, when I think about like the differences and whatnot, kids that come from lower socioeconomic environments, it's very hard for them to come to school whole, because there's got so many other things going on. And again, not to say students in other environments don't have that as well, but there just seems to be a little bit more, I don't know what the right word is, but there just seems to be an understanding of, I'm going to school because I'm expected to go to school, because by going to school, it's going to allow me to continue my family's whatever.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
So I mean, I don't, but that's just kind of this a long answer to a very succinct question. I apologize, but
The similarities, though, are greater in your estimation than the differences,
most
because
definitely.
students across the settings show many of the same characteristics.
Most definitely. I mean, and the reality too, when you talk about the characteristics, again, I'm gonna go into the survival component of it, right? So if you come from a high stress area, and you don't have an opportunity to deal with that, it's gonna show itself in many different ways, right? So if you're coming into school, for example, and you had a rough morning, as a result of whatever it was you're dealing with, just getting to school. Yeah. Whether it was taking the bus and the train, missing your train, trying to find the next train. Let's say there's snow outside, and by the time you get there, you've already dropped your Chromebook 5 times, and by the time you get to school, you realize that it's broken. By the time you sit down, your mindset and your thought pattern, you're not really ready to receive and to be whole and to be silent and to be that's a lot. And now again, it doesn't really matter where you're from. That's just the commonality of this human nature. But what I've realized, again, in different spaces now, including that a school where you come into and there's like no metal detectors, and you walk in and someone's at the front door saying, "Good morning, how are you doing today?" You're able to go in the classroom. There's a homeroom space for you where you kind of settle down. It's just a different energy in the building. Compare that to another environment where you come in, there's like 15, armed security officers. Yeah. You got the metal detectors. Drama just popped off. When does that child settle in to get into a space to really come in to learn and to achieve and do what? So I'm just saying, like, it's about what surrounds and what supports and allows for an environment conducive for learning.
Which really speaks to social emotional learning.
Most definitely.
Being an important component of education.
Most definitely.
And
most definitely. One of the things that I know a lot of districts are doing, and I know the city's doing too, is as a result of, especially after COVID, is where you really saw this big push now into having social emotional learning, because those were unfortunate realities, But at the same time, it's something that I feel, looking back, I wish we had, or I had when I was younger. Mm-hmm. This idea of allowing space and time for students and teachers to look into how we deal with conflict, how we deal with stress, and teaching behaviors that are, regulated behaviors that allows us to still be successful and navigate through these things.
When I was in high school, I had some pretty, what I would say was some kind, nice teachers who, when I had a situation in my life where, I had a family issue, I lost my brother.
Wow.
This was like, teachers were kind of like, how you doing? You can always talk to me. So the idea that they were positive educators, that was that was there, but the social emotional support systematically put into the school really wasn't there. For instance,
Exactly.
the guidance counselors really served as great advisors and just helped us to form our schedule, but really didn't talk very much with us about anything that might have needed exploring in a student's life.
And I don't know. It's interesting you say because to be quite honest with you, I only met my guidance counselor like later on
Yeah,
in my life. And again, to your point, it was only for like, do you want to go to college? What are your plans after high school? It never was a conversation of, well, how are you doing? Like, my counselors at my school, they have their part of their introductory conversation is, how are things going at home? How are you feeling? I'm here not just for you academically. I'm here if there's any other issues going on in your family, in
right,
your home, and it's okay to not be okay. Like
right.
there's all of these opportunities for a student to look within themselves in a deeper way. Where I think I know when we were coming up, that time for reflection wasn't there, right?
For
It
the most
was
part,
for the
it was
most part,
not.
it was just
Yeah,
you'll just do your grades, just do your schoolwork, make sure your grades are good. If you're acting up, deal with it.
yeah.
That's it. You just gotta or detention,
Correct.
just
More of zero
zero
tolerance,
tolerance,
consequence oriented. So let me ask you, you have a Juris Doctor degree. Had you continued in the field of law, what kind of law do you think you'd be practicing, and what kind of things do you think you would be doing in that field?
It's a very, very powerful question. To be quite honest with you, at this stage in my life, when I look back about the decisions I've made, if I was to decide to stay in law, I would have to ultimately I would have found my way into educational law or advocacy,
Advocacy.
or some level of politics and policy making. Because at the end of the day, that's my core of who I am. I learned a long time ago, you can't run from yourself. You could work as hard as you can trying to live other dreams. Like, to go back, growing up as a first generation Haitian, most Haitians will tell you this, most Caribbean children will tell you this, you got like three options, doctor, lawyer, architect / engineer. And growing up, that was really what was presented to me. Couldn't stand math or science, so that was being a doctor engineer was not it. So when I decided to go into the law, I wasn't content because I didn't feel like I was connecting to my true self or to my true calling. And throughout college and even when I was in law school, I was always active in the community, whether it was Big Brother program, Upward Bound,
Yeah.
different things that involved what I look back now is connections with young adults, education. So if I didn't make that transition and become an educator, I definitely would have been an attorney in the space of education because I feel like, that is my calling. That is what I was meant to do. So,
Yeah.
and it's funny because even when I was an educator, in terms of being in the classroom, my lesson planning was consistent with my legal planning in terms of preparing a lesson the same way you prepare a brief or a presentation to a jury or prepare questions for a deposition. You would prepare questions for class.
Say
You
more
would
about that. Like,
present.
what would you give me a for instance on that? Like, what kind of things would you be? How would you be approaching the
So
content with
at
students?
the end of the day, like, so in terms of connecting the two worlds, like at the end of the day in law, especially when you talk about trial work, you're basically and essentially presenting a story, and you present a story and you're also informing,
Yeah.
right? And hopefully in informing and presenting the story, it lands on enough jurors that they're going to find for your particular client. I kind of take the same approach as an educator. I'm presenting, uh, you know, my BA was in English. So when I transitioned into education through the New York City Teaching Fellows program, I naturally just went into becoming an English teacher. So in that space, as an English teacher, I kind of took the same approach. I'm presenting this story, and I'm trying to find a commonality or a theme that's going to land on the students and hit them a specific way, and make them engaged and want to partake in it as well,
Yeah.
and to see the importance of it. Because one of the things that I know I learned in law school is like when you have a jury, you have to keep them engaged. If they don't feel connected to you, or if they don't feel connected to your client, they're not going to
lose.
There you go.
Yeah.
Same thing translates into the classroom.
Right.
If the students don't feel connected to you, they don't feel connected to what's being presented, you've lost them. So anytime I did any type of lesson, I kind of took that approach that, well, how am I going to engage them? How am I going to hold their attention? The reality and the difference, obviously, in education and the law is being a juror to some degree is there's a passive relationship there. Whereas in education, it can't be passive. You need a collaboration between the teacher and the student, where the students have the opportunity to ask questions,
Right.
where the student has an opportunity to question you about what you're telling them, where the student has an opportunity to go and find their own answers, bring it back, and have debates. And so I enjoyed that. So I decided to create more and more of that space. And it's interesting because even now in education, if you look at where schools of thought are leaning towards, is students cannot be passive learners. They have to be actively involved
Absolutely.
in the learning process. So again, I was already in that space because of my legal background and experience. So I think that really helped me in the decade that I was in the classroom as a classroom teacher. And as an administrator, trying to turnkey that to my staff. And really, it's interesting because, they say most teachers teach the way they were taught. And, coming up in the 80s and 90s, it was rows. Mm-hmm. It was, take out your textbooks.
Right.
The teacher had the Bible, which was basically the teacher's edition of whatever subject matter.
That was the Bible.
They would make sure they hid it from the kids, and they'd go and look at and as a student, you were just waiting for them because they had the answers. Whereas now, with the internet, social media, to be quite honest with you, information is out there.
Yeah.
And the art of teaching now is not so much about providing students with information. Now it's the art of teaching students how to think about the information that they are receiving. We talk about read, write, think critically. So this idea of becoming critical thinkers is at the heart of education now. And I just feel like when I work with my teachers, I'm always like, it's so important that your lessons not only engage the students and allow them to feel there's a learning space where they can grow, but it's also allowing them to question and allowing them to have enough confidence to be in a space where, it's okay if I'm going to take what I like to call intellectual risk and put something out there, or say, Mr. Singfield, we had this discussion yesterday, and yesterday I was on Instagram and somebody made a comment about da-da-da-da. That's okay, because that's part of the entire learning process. So again, I just think that when I process the experiences that I've had as an attorney and now as an educator, it's just, I feel blessed that I'm able to utilize that not only for the time that I spend in the classroom, but now as an administrator to support my teachers and their craft and trying to, support them.
Absolutely.
In what they do in the classroom.
The teachers that I had that truly impacted me were the ones who engaged us, were the ones who didn't just lecture on the subject matter, but had us interact and participate and deal directly with, whether it was literature, social studies. We were interacting, and that's what made for good teaching, because in that way you are, as a student, internalizing, and that's wonderful that you are involved with promoting that.
And to be honest with you, the next phase, right? So, for example, when we came up, it was about compliance. We had to comply, right? Do your homework.
Yeah.
We had to do exams that were based on rote memorization. Know your times tables. The shift, as we're saying now, is now into this idea of engaging the student, making them partners. But the next phase now is this idea of empowering the students too, right? So where you engage a student in the classroom and you allow for these discussions and whatnot. But now when you move to the next level of empowering the kids, you actually allow them to be active participants in the learning itself. So it's a situation where as a teacher, it's like, so listen, we have these two books we can read, the Odyssey, or we could read Dante's Inferno. This book, Odyssey, is going to take us on a journey. It's going to have these type of themes connected to it. Dante's Inferno is going to also go take us on a journey, and it's going to have these type of themes to it. Which ones do you guys feel a connection to that we should approach, whatever? And the kids themselves, in their response, might be like, yo, that Dante Inferno, that's something we want to read. All right, so let's do that. Or if you are a master teacher, you would provide students with both. So your class, the days of reading one book as a class novel, no, we're reading multiple books, but we're looking at the books through the lenses of common themes. And then the students are making those connections for themselves. And then by the end of it, the students can create, I don't know, some type of project or presentation about how all these books, even though they haven't read all the different ones, but through class activities, class discussions, they're getting a sense of the different books, how these themes are seen throughout it's endless where this can go. So this idea of empowering them and making them collaborators. So that's the next phase.
Yeah.
And that's where my children who are like 13 and 10, that's the world learning environment that they're growing into. And it's pretty exciting, to be quite honest with you. It's pretty exciting to see that.
So you touched on it at the beginning. What is the value of education? What do you believe education does for young people that is unique to education?
I don't want to sound cliche, but education is power. It's everything. It's everything. An educated person, that is the one resource you cannot lose. You could lose your house. You could lose your finance. You could lose your money. You could lose your car. But the things that you've learned, what you're educated about, you can never lose that. I mean, granted, we could talk about as you get older, the senility, Alzheimer's disease, whatever. But even at the core of that, there's components of your educated man is going to come out. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about education, the importance of it, it gives you power to, and it gives you the power to access information. You never see an educated person living or being in a state of being in a place of deficit, right? They're not there's no real deficits there. So if you're educated enough to learn what you need to know in order to succeed, you'll be able to do that. And the more educated you are, actually, I think the better human being you become, because through education, you build empathy. You start to relate and understand another person's point of view while still being able to appreciate your own point of view. Let me give you a quick example. When I was in law school, for some reason, I don't know why, whenever we dealt with the civil rights cases or anything, my law professors would always turn to me.
I wonder why.
I don't know why, right? They would just always sit there and have these conversations, and I would always be the person that they would turn to. And for the most part, based on my life experiences and based on my own readings of the law or what I thought I understood, to me, the rationale for why affirmative action cases should have went the way that they went for the betterment of, society and culture or whatever. And man, I remember one time though, there was a student who had the same passions for the reasons why affirmative action should not be a part of the social construct of this culture. That was one of the best days I've ever had in my life, having that debate, because I was learning much about this counter opposing views that had I not been in that space, I never would have had an opportunity to understand. And the same way that I had a certain understanding that I thought I knew, but because I was an educated individual, I was also able to receive without feeling insecure or without feeling threatened. Understand what I'm saying? Because I was educated. So that's power, and by growing, again, it's helped me out and shape, helped me, and it's allowed me to be able to navigate in different spaces because of the levels of education. And to be quite honest, I'm sorry, real quick, education never stops. Mm-hmm. Like, you can have 5, 6, 7 degrees. You're not done. You're still learning. And So one of the things I always try to impart on my students, and when I always impart on my teachers, this idea of lifelong learning. That as teachers, we want our students to become lifelong learners. And as educators, we have to, by the nature of what we do, be lifelong learners. We cannot get comfortable in, well, I've been teaching this curriculum for the past 25 years, and that's just what I'm going to do.
Right.
You can't live in that space. And I always use the analogy of going to like a dentist or a doctor's office, right? You walk into a doctor's office and it looks like 1972, but it's 2023.
Yeah.
How long do you think you're going to sit in that office? Right? You're going to be like, okay, this something is wrong here. I'm out. Because your expectation is it's 2023 now. At this point, there's certain back to the expectations, right? There's expectations that there's going to be certain levels of technology, certain understandings about alternative types of medication to also support whatever diagnosis that I'm like. You want your doctor to be up on these things.
Right.
Same thing has to be in education. You cannot
Absolutely.
get to a place where you're like, well, this is just what we do because we've always been doing it. That's not learning. That's not being educated. So to me, when you say what does education mean, when I say it's power, it's power. And if you think about some of the most successful people in the world, it's not so much about their degrees, it's that they're always hungry to be educated, to grow.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's not just a moment of complacency. It's I'm always trying to grow. I'm always trying to get better. So education, in the conceptually speaking of learning, it's power, man.
The word educate actually comes from a Latin word that means to bring out what is within.
Wow.
So it's really,
See, you just broke something down to me.
yeah,
You know
it's
what I mean?
really
That's beautiful.
It's really not someone just putting a lecture on you that you can remember, rote memory. It really does have to do with bringing out the best in people intellectually and even that emotional piece.
Well, again, it's this idea, right, that you have to be whole. To receive, you have to be at a state of peace, a state of knowledge of self, understanding. I mean, one of the things that concerns me so much about young people today is so much going on. Everything is coming at them fast, man. If you're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, like you're just scrolling up, quick, read short, quick. When is there a time to just stop and reflect upon the information that they're getting? And that's one of my concerns that I'm just having now, just thinking about society. Is it just the headlines, and are we going to respond to that and just take that as the truth? The reality is, a large portion of, I know for a fact, a lot of students, for example, that's where they get their news from. It's not from watching,
No, I mean, you're absolutely
it's
right.
about, what was on Instagram and Twitter and.
What about the fact that young people have these opportunities to become an overnight sensation, to even if if you're putting out content, if you're putting out a product, if you hit hard enough on the internet, you could really gain a lot of success. Does that somehow neutralize or take away the value of traditional education?
I don't think so, because part of being a content person is, one, you have to understand your audience. You got to understand marketing to your audience.
Yeah.
You have to understand finances involved, because the way, what does it mean? How does it work with whatever particular social outlet or media that you're using? How is the money going to be divided between you and them? You have to understand if you become what's the word that they are? If you're, what's the person called that is promoting the thing? If you're an influencer,
Yeah.
in terms of understanding the contracts that you're reading, the digital contracts or however they sign it. So reading is imperative. You got to think about how you're going to make the presentations. You have to know your audience. I mean, these are things that are taught in school as soft skills. So either way, that's part of the educational process. a lot of times you're going to have to make collaborations. So education, the way it was traditionally, again, where you were receiving information, the way education is now is more collaborative, it's more engaging, which supports the world that the students are coming into. So it's not like you're 16 years old and you have 5 million followers and you're like, you good. Because to me, the reason you do these things into success is about sustainability.
Sustainability.
Sustainability, and
Yeah.
only through education. So I don't know about you, but if I'm a 16-year-old and I have about 5 million followers, and right now I'm making all this money, this bread, whatever kids call it today. 10, 15 years from now, I want to keep making that bread and making sure I can take care of my life or my family or have a certain particular standard. If I'm not able to grow in that space and understand through being an educated individual, you may not be able to. And that's why I was saying that education is a lifelong process.
Lifelong. I will say that, there was such an emphasis on safety in terms of going into jobs that were safe. Get a job that has a pension. Get a city job.
Yes.
There was that emphasis
Yes.
when I was a young person coming of age, and it is admirable, I think, that young people kind of feel that they can do anything and that there is no limit. Yet I do agree with you that there needs to be a balance where you realize that sustainability, that word that you use, in terms of your earning potential,
Right.
in terms of your learning potential, in terms of just remaining relevant, even, it's necessary for.
It's funny because I think of that from the lens of an artist, right? So you're an artist and you can sing, and we know this story. Unfortunately, the countless amount of artists that were out there singing, working hard, but are dead broke, right? And then you sit like, well, how did that happen? Well, they weren't educated on the business. They weren't
Right.
educated on the finances. They weren't educated on the legal ramifications of whatever the contract said that you signed. You know what I'm saying? So to me, they say that the game doesn't change, just the players and maybe the arena, but it's the
Yeah.
same game. So now we have social media. So you got, again, I'm just using hypothetical example. I'm 16-year-old, 5 million followers. I'm just blowing up, doing whatever. And what I'm signing sponsored. But again, 10 years from now, are you still going to be relevant?
Mm-hmm.
And in that space, it's about, if you don't, either you grow with your, that's what makes people like Jay-Z, right, so unique, right? Because this is an individual who not only is able to grow with his audience, but, was educated enough to understand the importance of being able to be relevant to the next generation coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And not only to be relevant musically, but to be relevant because of the decisions he's made as a businessman. So now they're looking at him. He's not just a rapper and entertainer. He's an icon because of the fact, that he saw the long view. I mean, if you go back to think about the rappers that came out the same year Jay-Z came out,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
It's
And then you think about them, and but they're not. Who are they now? You don't say their names, and then, again, it's no disrespect, but that's what I'm saying. It's really about. That's what I was saying. Being lifelong learners.
It's important, though, the distinction when you talk about education, that education is really remaining knowledgeable about the workings of everything around you,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's not just getting the formal education or the degrees.
And therein
Education
lies the
is,
lie to me. And by the lie, I mean, like, you have this degree you set, you good, you're done. Oh man, you got
Yeah.
the degree, you just starting, right? If you don't have aha moments just through life itself, which to me is one of the biggest educators out there, you can have as many
Living
teachers
life.
you want, just
Yeah.
living life itself.
Yeah.
But again, the idea is, man, you got to be open to grow, or else it's like, what are we doing here?
How about your degrees? I mean,
I don't have any. It's funny. I have 4 degrees total. Not one of them is up on my wall. I don't have not one degree hanging in my office, in my home. They're still in the envelopes. And I've had conversations with people like, well, how come you don't have none of your degrees up? And I'm like, I don't know. Like I mean, Lord knows my bank account feels it because you got to pay back those loans and everything. But at the end of the day, for me, it's not about that.
A degree is a means to an
It's a
end.
means to an end.
But let me ask this question now. With your degrees, particularly the ones that matter for what you do, having a degree in secondary education, you learned child development, you learned pedagogy and classroom methods, administration, leadership. Do those degrees help you to do what you do more effectively, or is it the life experience, as we said? Because I'll just throw in this comment really quickly. When I went to school for school and mental health counseling, I kind of feel like I learned some very important things about how to be a therapist. But when I started off as a school counselor in New York, graduate school really didn't help me to achieve anything that I achieved in the schools with students. I think it was really my experience in seeing what the students needed and learning on the job.
That's a powerful question because wow, that's a good one. I think yes, it teaches you the basics and the foundational components. It teaches you how the structure and the frameworks, as a teacher, your lesson planning, as a teacher, understanding childhood developmental stages,
Yeah.
as a teacher, teaching you instructional, whatever. Point is, though, until you get the job and you're working, and that first day, your principal comes to you and says, so listen, one of the teachers that we hired bowed out last night. So we're going to combine your classes. And yeah, so originally you had about like 13 kids. Looks like you're about to have 35. It's not going to be long. We're going to keep looking for somebody else. And you're sitting there like, I didn't prepare for 35 kids. And then the kids come and see, in education and in teaching in particular with those degrees, nothing prepares you. Each child comes to you as a universe. So if you got 35 kids in your classroom, you have 35 universes. And you have to figure out a way to touch, reach, inspire, grow, and develop 35 universes.
That's a good way to put it.
Nothing can teach you how to do that. The only thing that could prepare you for that, and this is why I will say about this idea of the book smarts and stuff, is to, yes, have an understanding of childhood development. But then until you see what that means to each individual time and each different point in their lives as it relates to the consequences of things that they either had control over or did not have control over, man, that's where you just got to take everything you've learned to some degree and throw it out the window and say, all right, let me roll up my sleeves and let me just see what's going on. And one of the most important components of teaching, which again, they can't teach you this, there's got to be a passion for the desire to be around young adults. There has to be a love and understanding that, there's seeds that you're planting and you may not ever see the results of that. Or by God's grace, you do get blessed. And I've been blessed to see the results of the work through the successes and even through some of the struggles of my students. But the reality is it takes time and nothing prepares you for that. It's funny when I think about becoming a lawyer, like when you go to law school, they teach you how to be a lawyer. They teach you the law. They teach you how to think like a lawyer, how to
much
write
more
like a lawyer.
procedural
It's
than
much more
dealing with human
procedural than
beings.
right.
Yeah.
A client comes to you out of a sense of need. So as an attorney, you're sitting there learning the case, whatever, but at the end of the day, it's the facts and what you can and can't prove. And whereas this education doesn't work that way. When you're a doctor, they teach you medicine, i.e., what symptoms can correlate to what remedies and whatever, and yeah, so those applications there. But when you talk about education, can you really be taught people? Can you really
Human souls.
Right? Can you really be taught that?
Right.
Can you be taught an individual's potential? and how to bring that out.
That's a very
You
valid
you
point.
could have the greatest lesson plan known to mankind, but again, if 15 out of 15 students don't get it, and your pass rate is 50, are you a successful educator?
So
I mean, so that's like one of those things. That's what. So to your answer, it's complicated. So
no, that was brilliant commentary, definitely. And so what is the direction? And maybe this is a good segue from where we were. What is the direction that schools, teachers, administrators, people who are in the business of developing other human beings, what is the direction that you believe that we should be going in?
I think it's important. There's equity, cultural awareness. These are really big. People call them like buzzwords or whatever, but I really think that has to become a purposeful educational design. It is more important now, especially when we talk about social emotional learning, the impact of one's cultural background and being cognizant of this and the impact that that has on the student, how they see themselves, being open to different variations of one's identity and self. Education should not be a space of judgment. It should be a space of openness and development. So I don't care what your politics are. I don't care what your spiritual beliefs are. There's a human being in front of you. And your role as an educator is to make sure you create a space for that individual to grow into the best person that they can be, that they choose to be, while at the same time developing skills that they're going to need to succeed. Critical reading, writing, thinking, all that. And I think that in the space of education where it needs to go, and this is a complicated issue because, especially when we talk about equity and being culturally responsive, the first person that you have to teach and develop is yourself as the educator. You cannot teach to a group of students without first recognizing your own biases, your own whatever, because that's going to impact your expectations of those students. It's going to impact how you present to those students.
Absolutely.
It's going to impact your relationships with those students. So, I've seen situations where school districts have, forcing teachers to take these courses and being culturally responsive and equity. And I've seen the rooms where the teachers are just eyes are glazed over, like, I don't really care about this. This is whatever, yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, therein lies the problem. As an educator, you first have to look within yourself. And that's a struggle that I think that's the struggle now in education, to be honest with you, is the educators in the room. It requires them, you talk about educate, they have to educate themselves first on who they are, in their own.
Yeah, let me say this. I have heard stories from people who are doing the work of restorative justice, from people who are doing the work of creating equity and inclusion within the school system. That when you talk to principals, when you talk to all types of school leaders about where their biases may be, they're often very resistant to learning about that because
It's a mirror.
it's a question mark
Right.
on my
On
morality
morality
now.
and right.
And nobody, I mean, to call someone a racist is to call someone a pariah, a terrible person. And, the first rule of psychology, or one of the rules of psychology, is that everyone wants to be acceptable. Everybody wants to feel like they are quote unquote okay. And so that's a very deep point that you made, that to look at yourself as an educator and to know you, and to be okay with the fact that you may have come up in a system where you don't have all the answers, and that you are needing to be this lifelong learner. That can be very sobering for people.
And the unfortunate reality is, you have a lot of older educators, just on that alone are looking into their retirement system right? Like, no, I ain't got time for this. It's
Yeah.
work, you know. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years or 28 years, and now I have to be my yes. And the reality is, America is changing. You know, it really is changing as a country in terms of becoming more ethnically diverse, not just racially. Become like it's evolving. And as an educator, the students, if you want to be in education, your student population is going to grow and change. It's interesting. I'm having conversations now about the impact. So some people might say, well, no, the district I live in is predominantly one race, especially when you think about Long Island versus the city, right? So in the city, you have students coming from different boroughs choosing a particular school, whereas in the island, it's your district,
Your neighborhood, basically.
it's your community standards, and some communities are like, well, that's not an issue for us because we all share the same community standards, and when you live here, this is da. Okay, but one thing that I think you might be able to speak to this better than me. I believe I've read how research shows there's actually a negative impact on students who are brought up in these spaces where they've been isolated to think one way or whatever, but there's a negative impact when they go either to college or the workforce. That tends to look more like the realities of what America is, and they don't know how to navigate or understand or appreciate, others, and that causes
Absolutely.
conflicts and whatnot. So there's a disservice that's also done when we don't make this a universal change or approach where it's out of necessity because of the country that we're growing into, that no, we need to start being aware and mindful of every. Now, that doesn't mean you have to accept everything cold hard or whatever. But again, it's just, if you're an educated individual, you can be open to hear and listen without the threat of, is this going to, because I think one of the things that is always a hindrance towards growth, when we talk about change, but it is ultimately, change itself is a hindrance towards a lot of people's own growth, because you get so comfortable in your space, in your skin or whatever. But then when someone starts coming and opening doors that make you feel uncomfortable, that uncomfortableness, there's a hesitancy to be like, no, I don't.
Absolutely. Being woke is even relative, right? Because
Woke.
there's
It's crazy, that concept of woke. I don't know. It's interesting when people talk about being woke, right? If I could, I don't know if I may deviate from, but when we were coming up, at least when we talked about being woke, it was from the state of understanding the system and how the system, unfortunately, impacts those who aren't of the system. So be awake, be woke to the realities of the world around you. But now it seems like this idea of wokeness has been so politicized that it's been used now as a weapon. Like, it's almost like, it's a negative connotation. Like, you're part of the woke crowd or this. And I'm just like, I don't know. It just seems like it's been.
I think it's similar
it's been
to many years ago,
I
because
just feel
many
like it's
years
been more
ago,
co-opted though, right?
if people said they were conscious or black conscious or those who said that they were aware of the inequities for people who were gay, lesbian, or transgender, people say, oh, you're one of those you're one of those radicals, or you're one of those people who want to change everything. So it's all relative, but yes, I definitely agree with you. It's people are looked at with a great deal of suspicion.
I was about to say that, but there's much more now of a negative connotation with that now. Like, where, I don't know, I feel like it was actually something you aspired to be, to have your eyes open, to see, certain realities of life and to understand how things actually move or how things actually are. Like when the whole thing started coming in, like about, like, for example, critical race theory and all that, and how that caused all this, the woke is trying to, but it's like, it's called history. It's not, what I mean? It's like, it's not a race theory. It's just history and teaching the realities. Like, that doesn't make you woke. It makes you, it's the reality of what this country is versus.
Absolutely.
So that's why, to me, I just see, like, wow, it's interesting how in the last 5 years this idea now is so, like,
Yeah. I
negative,
mean,
and it's caused such
I
such
think you're right.
unfortunate. You know what I mean?
Any label that you put on those who want a more honest assessment of society and how to approach things, that label takes on something very destructive, because there's people who actually want to make America like it was again.
Right.
You know,
And again, you notice when we talk about education, that's why it's, as an educator, it sickens me when these things happen, and the first thing they do is run and start impacting education and what can be and can't. And I think there's a place for, again, honest conversations about that, in terms of, you know, why is this important for our kids to learn? At what age should our kids be exposed to certain things? I think that should be the conversation, as opposed to never bring this. You know what I mean? Because the reality is, you live in this world, you're going to be exposed to things, you're going to see things. So I think maybe the conversation should shift, but that's where sometimes as an educator, it does, you get nervous. You're like, are we going to start burning, restricting books? Are we going to start, like, we teach, Fahrenheit 451, like, like that's novels about a dystopian society. It's not a novel that's about, this is where we want to go. So when you see things that potentially can lead to that, you get very nervous, because again, it does impact the ability of culture or society itself to grow. And again, things are changing. That is what it is.
ladies and gentlemen, Vronski Mesidor, career educator. It was a pleasure having you
Oh
here.
man, it was a blessing to be here, and much success and continued rise to what you do. And just want to say to you, to your staff and organization, thank you for the work that you're doing. I personally see the benefits of it, even in education, as we work through the mental health and educational space to help create, young minds and support them in their learning process. So thank you.
Thank you, man. We
Appreciate
appreciate that. And like, subscribe, share, hit the notification button. We want this message to get out, so keep connecting with us. Peace and love.